heartburn. A rush lunch.
Try these.
The great Gaviscon rip-off. The inside story of how one drug company cost the NHS millions.
That is cool. I can really feel it. What a feeling!
Good evening. Drug companies always argue that the reason some drugs cost so much is that it's necessary to make big profits to invest in further research. But Newsnight has discovered another reason some drugs cost so much. For years, the manufacturer Reckitt's has done everything it can to avoid the drug Gaviscon being replaced by much cheaper generic drugs when the patent ran out way back in 1999. It's a tale of dodging and delaying that cost the NHS millions of pounds, and it raises questions about who's supposed to ensure value for money. Martin Shankelman reports.
Are you getting to you, Joe?
No heartburn. A rush lunch.
Try these.
Think of Gaviscon and ads like this come to mind. They may be cheesy, but they are memorable.
That is cool. I can really feel it. What a feeling!
Gaviscon is hailed as a power brand by its owners Reckitt Benckiser. It's one of a number including Finish, Dettol and Vanish, which helped make the company £1 billion last year. Reckitt Benckiser like to claim that the profits flow from their expertise in marketing. But we know that there's another way in which they've been coining it in, by ripping off the NHS, as a whistleblower has told us. Do you think Reckitt's cheated the NHS?
Reckitt's cheated the National Health Service. It could have saved the NHS millions of pounds. But not just the NHS, patients, doctors, they've cheated health professionals. I felt it had to be exposed.
While you can buy Gaviscon at the chemist, the core of the business is the millions made from doctors' prescriptions. The company was allowed to charge high prices because Gaviscon was under patent. But when that expired in 1999, the NHS should have been able to switch to cheap generic copies, saving it a fortune. But it never happened. We've seen Reckitt's secret plan to ensure it kept its stranglehold. Experts who've seen our evidence say it's the sort of thing drug companies have long been suspected of doing.
I'm stunned, really, because even though I and other observers of this kind of activity kind of suspect that this is the kind of thing that goes on, it's amazing to have it laid out in so much detail.
Reckitt's chosen tactic was to exploit a seemingly trivial issue. To create a generics industry, you have to have a generic name for the medicine. And if you can stop that being published, then you foil competition.
It was the #1 priority within Gaviscon, the prevention of a generic name and the protection of Gaviscon's business, either through patent or through manipulation of the government organisations.
So this is how they did it. In 2000, the authorities were all set to announce the generic name. Reckitt's challenged their right to do so, and the process was halted for 3 years. In 2003, the authorities tried again. This time, Reckitt's used a different spoiling tactic. It set about engineering a further delay by getting a regulatory body involved. The body is called the British Pharmacopoeia, the BPC, and it made a decision which played into Reckitt's hands. The BPC announced that before anything else could happen, it was to embark on the task of preparing a scientific paper, a monograph, on how to make generic Gaviscon. Reckitt's was delighted, as it could take years to complete. Reckitt's took credit for preventing the publication of the name. We have successfully managed to stop the process, it wrote in one of a number of emails. We asked a leading competition lawyer how incriminating they were. Right, so the 7th of July, if you look at this one here.
They were planning on granting a generic name for Gaviscon liquid. We have successfully managed to stop this process. Tim is leading this project to devise a plan to extend the development of a name for as long as possible.
Yes, I mean, to me that suggests that what they're trying to do is manage the regulatory process in order to keep the generic out by spinning out the process as long as they can, and that is an issue. This other email is interesting from Mr. Sharma, 23rd of July.
So who is Mr. Sharma? Anand Sharma is a top executive. Here he's pictured on the company website. In the last few weeks he helped broker a £1 billion takeover deal.
This other email is interesting, from Mr. Sharma, 23rd of July.
It is quite a clever idea to protect Gaviscon liquid from the generics threat. Should we not drag it as long as we can? £9 million business at stake.
So that suggests that the sole or most important reason for doing this is to drag on the process. It suggests that the company's aim is not to work with the authority, but it is to delay the entry of generic. This is an interesting one here. We can direct the monograph.
It would be long and complicated, a further barrier to competitors. We are the best people to define tighter specifications which could restrict entry for new competitors.
It is clear from that bullet point that the whole reason why they want to be engaged in this process is to restrict the entry for competitors.
We showed John Schmidt other documents as well, marketing plans, position papers. The discussions involved many leading executives, not a few mavericks who'd overstepped the mark.
To be clear, it's not purely being a hard competitor. It is where you use trickery in processes or abuse the system, and that's where you get into quite a tricky position if you have a 90% market share.
NHS figures show Gaviscon has 88% share of the alginic acid compound market. By law, companies in a dominant market position can't abuse their power to thwart competition. And John Schmidt says there are strong grounds here for the authorities to launch an inquiry.
What is surprising here is that you have these smoking guns buried in their emails. And one area which is now established for an abuse of dominance is where you abuse a regulatory process in order to delay generic entry. AstraZeneca will find by the European Commission some 60 million euros for doing precisely that. And the emails that I've seen here and the wording that is suggested in the email is very reminiscent of exactly what happened to AstraZeneca in that case.
And now I'm going to give him one long night of hellish heartburn.
Reckitt still had one more trick up their sleeve to guarantee even more years of big profits. They capitalised on the delays to switch patients onto a different version called Gaviscon Advance, which crucially was still patent protected.
By launching products at a certain time in a certain way, they can ensure that the NHS, doctors and patients go on using their branded product rather than a generic copy. So they can ensure, if you like, that their share of the market remains perhaps artificially high.
Reckitt announced they were withdrawing Gaviscon liquid from the NHS and sent out their reps and nurse advisors to GPs to push patients onto Gaviscon Advance. What happened in practice in the surgeries?
The nurse advisor would go in to get agreement from the doctor or practice manager. They'd make a smoke and mirrors argument that Gaviscon Advance is a better product with no clinical evidence. Get them to switch all the patients, go in and change the computer systems overnight, and maybe a letter would go out to all the patients saying your medication has been changed.
Around Britain, the company reps were given the job of converting the remaining patients. They would ring up GP surgeries and try to get them to switch the details on the patient's database to the new medicine. The pressure was on as the deadline approached, and here in Glasgow, the reps went too far. At least 5 GPs in the city were contacted by Reckitt's sales team, who tried to bounce them into switching patients onto Gaviscon Advance.
They phoned and spoke to one of our reception staff. They said that Gaviscon was ceasing to be available tomorrow, and that we should switch all our patients from Gaviscon onto Gaviscon Advance. And they then suggested that this was was being endorsed by one of our prescribing team.
But Dr. Spence knew that this was a lie.
I then phoned up the prescribing advisors, who said that they had made no such statement, and that they'd had a number of complaints from other practices of similar phone calls, and they were very sort of angry and distressed by this activity, which was patently just an opportunity to switch people onto Gaviscon Advance.
They reported them to the drug industry's own trade body in Whitehall. The Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry ruled that Reckitt's had misled GPs and behaved unethically. Given what we know about the company's aims, do you think they succeeded in achieving what they set out to do?
Yes, I mean, I think the evidence suggests that they have. I mean, Gaviscon Advance is established as a product. There's no serious competitor in the way that was originally envisaged for it. So yes, I think they will congratulate themselves as a job well done.
Tonight, the Department of Health has asked us to hand over all these documents to the NHS Counter-Fraud Service. They include costings which show you could make generic Gaviscon for 1/3 of the price. In other words, if competition had kicked in, as the authorities had wanted, the savings to the NHS could have been around £40 million.
Gaviscon, what a feeling.
Well, in response to all this, the allegations made in a report, Reckitt Healthcare UK sent us the following statement. We are shocked by the allegations made, as Reckitt Benckiser is a responsible company in the way it conducts its business. The company made representations within the law and regulations for the benefit of patients. Nevertheless, we're deeply concerned by the inappropriate sentiment expressed in some of the historic internal correspondence. We take this very seriously and have instigated an immediate internal investigation and will take action. Gaviscon has only 6% market share, and we refute much of what has been reported, which implies a power and influence we simply do not possess. I'm joined now by Kevin Barron MP, who's the Labour chairman of the Commons Health Select Committee. Mr Barron, what's your reaction to all this?
Well, just before I went onto the Health Select Committee, they just completed a report called The Influence of the Pharmaceutical Industry, and a couple of areas that's shown up on that clip they were quite critical of. One was the marketing of drugs within the National Health Service. The other one was about the issue of when drugs should be available as generic drugs, and it was called at that time evergreening, where this was sort of kept on forever, as it were, and it looks like we've got a bit of evergreening evidence in front of us this evening.
But can you hold them to account? I mean, will you call the Reckitt people in, can you do this, and ask them what they're up to?
Well, yes, the simple answer is we can do this. It's very interesting,
will you do
actually.
It?
Well, we don't have a legal right to be able to do it. There's two areas, I think, at this one. First of all is that this may be an area for the Office of Fair Trading. I think the lawyer that you had on tonight's clip shows exactly that. But of course, the Department of Health are the sponsoring organisation for the pharmaceutical industry. In that report I mentioned, they actually brought in that they were concerned about the issue of evergreening, of the non-availability of generic drugs when they should be, and the government said that they shared those concerns as well. So I think that it is an issue for the Department of Health, but probably for the Select Committee as well.
But do you understand that many people watching this must think, what was the NHS up to? If this medicine was out of patent, or potentially in 1999, why have we allowed this? Why has the NHS allowed this to go on?
Well, I think that's right. And there's a number of questions in that. I think one of them, and I think this will become clearer by the day, is that the way since 1999 commissioning has changed inside the National Health Service. Good doctors still get the right to drugs for their patients, but also good doctors make sure that they get generic drugs if they're available. So it saves, it saves taxpayers' money effectively. And I think that why this has gone on the way that it has, it looks like what we're seeing here tonight, is questions that need to be asked by government and probably by the Health Select Committee as well. We were aware that this was coming up, I have to say, and members will have watched this programme, be watching it tonight, and we'll take a decision in the next few weeks whether or not we are going to take any further action.
The implication of what you're saying is, what's unusual about this is we've got a whistleblower and we found out what's going on inside the company. What's not unusual is that it goes on with the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, as I say, the Select Committee alluded to that in their report in 2005. The government did say that they were looking at they were asked to review, and the government said that they would look to review the situation if this was the case. Clearly, questions will need to be asked about whether that ever took place. It was the government response to the committee report that I'm quoting effectively, and what action we believe that we ought to take. Maybe the OFT might want to take some action as well in view of the what seems to have happened in this case.
Well, bearing that in mind, do you think there's any way we as taxpayers can get our money back?
Well, that would be a matter for lawyers, quite frankly. I mean, the real issue here is whether it's legal or illegal, but the ethics of all this. You know, we look after the pharmaceutical industry. I do believe that this country does. We have a big purchaser in the form of the National Health Service. We do pay more for our drugs to recognise that research and development costs a lot of money. We have patent law that protects them, but we do expect when the patent ends that generic drugs come along and that we're able, as a purchasing on behalf of the National Health Service, looking after taxpayers' money, to purchase at lower prices. If that isn't happening, I think the deal's sort of being rumbled here, and I think that we need to question that the pharmaceutical industry have a responsibility as well as the taxpayers in this matter.
Mr. Brown, thanks very much for joining us.